Hi honeybees, my name is Raven, that's Jasper, and welcome back to our channel.
Subscribe to become part of the hive. Be sure to like and ring the notification bell. Thanks, honeybees. Enjoy the video.
It's been harder and harder to round up the cats these days. I feel like they know when I'm about to shoot a video, and they're just like, please, no paparazzi, I don't want to be on camera, so sorry. But they're here, they're around. It's been a minute since I've made or posted a video, and if you don't care about why that is and why I've been so busy this past month, go ahead and skip to when I start talking about the first movie, because I'm going to catch up on a lot of October films in this video. Basically, I had a lot going on. I was part of this horror maze, and I was really busy working and then going and being a scare actor in the horror maze for rehearsals all September and performances all in October, and I just did not have the energy to film anything during that time. I did have a Halloween special planned that will still be coming. It's just no longer going to be a Halloween special, obviously. Hopefully I'll have it out before Christmas so I can have a separate Christmas special. It'll just be a general holiday fall time special, I guess. It is another series video that I'm really excited about, but it's definitely going to be really, really long, and I just did not have the time to even try to work on it this month. So I do feel really bad about not being able to get a lot of October content out because it is my favorite month, but I will hopefully try to make up for that now and get back to normal. So with that being said, I did still get to see a lot of movies these past couple of months, and I want to talk about a couple that came out in October. Some technically released in September, but I saw them in October, and some that are technically out in November, but in LA, a lot of the times we get movies a little bit early. So I did see these in October as well, or just first week of November. So I'm counting it all in October movies, and we're going to come back with an October movie catch-up. So the first movie that I wanted to mention was Saw X.
After that, what happens then?
Your whole life happens then. John Kramer.
According to these scans, the tumor was never removed.
How much time do I have?
Months, at best.
I still have a lot of work that needs to be done.
I'm not going to talk too much about this movie because I would in the future love to make a Saw series video. I have seen all of them. I'd probably have to refresh myself before I make a video, but I'll definitely expand upon this one a lot more in that. That's when I tend to really expand on each movie in a series. So for this one, I'll just say it was pretty good. I mean, as far as Saw movies go, it was a bit of a slow burn. It was definitely pretty much just about John Kramer. It was a John Kramer story. A lot of them are at least partially about him, of course, but he's not usually the main character. He's the villain, right? And this one, he's the main character. He's not really the villain. In fact, I sympathized with him in this movie quite a bit. It is something bad that happens to him. If you don't know, if you haven't seen it, well, spoilers for everything, so hopefully you've seen these movies, but he has cancer. That's a running thing throughout Saw. They do keep with that. They haven't retconned anything really, which I do appreciate. I don't like when I don't like when a film series just retcons everything and changes the storyline, and it's hard to keep up, But Saw, they do a pretty good job about somewhat keeping a timeline. This is kind of a mid-series prequel. Takes place between, I think, the third and fourth, because John Kramer dies in, I think, the fourth one. So it's between those, either 2 and 3 or 3 and 4. When he has cancer and he gets offered this amazing surgery that's going to save his life, and it turns out it was all a scam. And this company is scamming all these horribly diseased people at the end of their life with no other choice out of all their money to give them this miracle surgery, but really they're not doing anything, and they're just pocketing the money. And John Kramer takes revenge on these people, obviously, and puts them into traps, right? Like a Saw film. And the thing about the traps is, normally that's one of the best parts, if not the best part of the Saw films, are the traps and getting to watch how they work. These traps, I felt went by a little bit quick for me. And there weren't really that many. We really didn't get a trap until over halfway through the film. We had the fantasy of a trap, the eyes trap from the poster where your eyes get sucked out unless you break all your fingers. Easy trap, by the way. Easiest trap in the world. I'll gladly break all my fingers to not get my eyeball sucked out. How is that even a choice? You know what I mean? But it was just a fantasy. It wasn't actually a trap, so they faked us out a little bit. And then the actual traps are extremely brutal, and they are completed. The three really that we see are all completed. Like, they beat the traps, but they die anyway. In one of them, a girl has to cut her leg off. They're all like surgery related because it was a surgery scam. One girl has to cut her leg off with a rope and then insert this like needle to get out her bone marrow or something like that. And she does it. She cuts off her leg. She puts the thing in there. Just the bone marrow thing that she has to filled up a little bit too slow. But I feel like if you do everything you're told, you cut your damn leg off, you insert a needle to get out your bone marrow, you did it, right? It's not her fault how fast the little machiney thing sucks her bone marrow. And another one too, a guy has to like cut a piece of his brain. He has to cut out his skull and cut off a piece of his brain, put it in acid or something, and like get a key. I don't remember the specifics of that one, but he had to cut off a piece of his brain. And he did it. And he put it in where he was supposed to put it. But again, it was one of those situations where whatever he was supposed to fill up didn't fill up before the timer, like after the timer ran out. And so he lost. And I felt very cheated on behalf of these people. They deserved it, what they got, to a point, of course. This was a pretty terrible scam. But it's interesting that they should have beaten the traps and they didn't. It was unfair. And I feel like that's part of Jigsaw's whole thing. Like, if you beat the traps, you get to go. It's happened before. It happened with Amanda, who's also in this movie. It happened with Dr. Gordon. There's a whole, like, support group of people, and I think Saw 7, who have survived Jigsaw's traps. It's possible. So they got cheated, for sure. But they were brutal. And there's a point where John Kramer himself is in a trap, which the whole thing just really made him a sympathetic character, which I kind of liked. It's definitely a new take on John Kramer. The only thing that felt out of place for me timeline-wise was I was wondering where his wife was, because they do talk about his wife in a couple of the movies, and she was nowhere to be found. She would have presumably been in his life at that point, I think, unless I'm missing something from one of the other films that would have explained that. But that was the only thing. Otherwise, fairly good movie, kind of middle of the pack for me as far as Saw movies go. I give this one a 3 out of 5. The other one I want to talk about, which honestly almost warranted its own video. I was gonna make a whole video about this one. This and A Haunting in Venice, which I'm not really gonna go over because that was earlier in September. Doesn't really matter anymore. I will say, not as good as the first two. Boring for A Haunting in Venice. The Exorcist Believer, again, it's just one of those things I didn't have time to make a whole video on it, but it deserves it.
Hey, you found her?
What were you and Catherine doing out there in those woods?
You were just walking and walking. That's all I remember. Angela, can you tell your dad how long you were gone?
A few hours.
Baby, you've been gone 3 days.
I didn't like it. I don't think that's a surprise that the movie was not good. If you've seen it, you know that. If you haven't seen it, I'm sure it's not a surprise either. I just feel like it didn't understand the source material. Like, it did not understand what made the original Exorcist movie so good and scary for the time. If you're gonna like adapt a movie that was like the scariest movie at the time, you have to like make it scary for modern audiences, and they didn't do that. It certainly was not scary at all. The reason that movie to me is so good, there's many reasons. One being the slow burn of finding out what's wrong with Regan, because her mother is a very rational woman, and a lot of the movie, the first like third of the movie, is Regan's mother putting her through all sorts of different, horrible, invasive, scary medical tests to exhaust every possibility about what might be wrong with her daughter. Because of course she's not going to think, oh, my daughter's possessed by a demon. She's a professional, rational woman. Nothing's ever really been wrong with her daughter before. Her daughter is an amazing, beautiful child who is suddenly acting very strange and erratically. So there's all these sequences of Regan like being like poked in the neck with needles, and blood is spurting out, and she's having all these sort of tests done, these crazy whirring machines, and she's grimacing, and it's painful and it's scary, and she's going through all that. She goes through psychological tests to try to figure it out. Every possibility is exhausted before we get to the conclusion of possession. And even then, it's hard for these characters to really accept that that's what's happening. In The Exorcist Believer, the whole series of events of the girls going missing and getting possessed and going through the exorcism is in the span of like a week, maybe less. I don't know. It's a very short period. It's like they were missing for 2 days, which the campaign for these girls who were missing for 2 days, you'd have thought it was like over a month of how much stuff that they do in 2 days, which I get it. Your daughters are missing, but it was like 3 days maybe. And then them in the hospital and being possessed and realizing that's possession, also just another couple of days. Whereas in The Exorcist original, it was over the course of several months, I believe, that this was all happening with all these tests and the slow build of the possession getting worse and worse. The Exorcist Believer, they really streamline it. I think part of it, and this is a problem with a lot of like modern remakes, especially modern horror remakes, is they have to make everything more extreme. Everything has to be more, not better, more. You know what I mean? So not one girl, 2 girls, a white girl and a black girl, because we want to have diversity, but we don't want to piss off the fans. So we still got the white girl in there, but also there's that black girl. And she doesn't have a single mom, she has a single dad. And the other girl's parents are very religious. And like immediately, the mom of the white girl is like, it's demon possession. They're possessed by demons. And the dad of the black girl is like, who played by Leslie Odom Jr., of course. I am the one thing in life I can't control. I was just thinking of Hamilton, like the whole time I was watching the movie. But he's like, no, that's ridiculous. And then like 2 scenes later, he's like, yeah, it's totally demon possession. Like, streamlined. And all that like stuff of trying to figure out what's wrong with the girls. Because obviously, why would you jump to possession? You know, they implied like, oh, after they were found, because what happens is the 2 girls go missing. They try to contact the main girl's mom, who'd like basically died giving birth to her, and we see a little backstory about that, and they end up getting possessed and found like 3 days later. And one's in the hospital. Our main girl, Leslie Odom Jr.'s daughter, is in the hospital, and white girl is at her parents' house being equally very possessed very fast, very demony very fast. The white girl, they make her look just like Reagan, and they even have the original actress Ellen Burstyn, who played Chris McNeil, Reagan McNeil's mom, and she goes to visit the little white girl who's possessed, and she looks just like Reagan. And for some reason, Chris McNeil seems to think that this demon wants to talk to her. It's like the same demon that was in Reagan, even though it's 2 different demons because it's 2 different girls. But she's like, they want to talk to me. I'm the mother of demons. She doesn't say that, but that's kind of the vibe where she's like, they're after. It's very similar, honestly, to the Halloween remakes, where Laurie Strode is like, Michael is after me. He's after me specifically. But that's not true. Michael's only after her because she continues to pursue him. He's not like gets out of jail and thinks Laurie Strode, right? He just thinks kill everybody. And Laurie Strode is in the way of that, right? And that's kind of the vibe that I get from Chris McNeil in The Exorcist Believer. And she has a really stupid line about how she didn't get to witness her daughter's exorcism because of the patriarchy. Ma'am, those priests died to save your daughter. They were professional exorcism priests. They knew it was about to get dangerous, and you could get very hurt because they got hurt to the point of where they died. So you should thank them for not allowing you to watch and also die. Even if you didn't die, it would probably be very traumatizing for you, more so than it ever was. So that's just what I mean by whoever made this film, and I'm not going to bother looking it up, did not understand the source material very well, because everything was wrong. The medical tests they do on the girls, it's like one scene, we don't see anything. The doctors are like, okay, we're just going to look in here, and we're just going to look in here, and you might feel some uncomfort, like implying like a vaginal exam in case they got assaulted. But that, again, nothing compared to what Reagan went through, and it's all just too quick. Another thing that is also a problem in a lot of modern horror remakes, making iconic scenes more graphic, because remember, we have to have more. It doesn't have to be better, it just has to be more. A good comparison to this is the film It, 2017, which I love. I adore that film, and I don't care that they did this, but it is a good example. The scene where Beverly is looking in the sink after like her hair gets pulled down there and blood comes out of the sink, and it bursts out her sink and covers her whole entire bathroom, and it's just buckets and buckets of blood. In the original It from 1990, I believe, when Beverly looks in the sink, it's just a little bit of blood, just a little gurgling of blood. So in It, the remake, they had to make it more extreme and do blood covering the bathroom. Something like that happens in The Exorcist Believer, where in The Exorcist, the original, there's a scene where Reagan is, while possessed, stabbing herself in the crotch with a cross. We don't see the contact of the cross into her crotch, but we see the blood, we see the motion of her doing it with the cross, and we hear what she is saying, and we can put it all together, right? And it's a very uncomfortable, somewhat graphic scene without actually like seeing what happens. It is like graphic despite that. In The Exorcist Believer, their take on that scene, I guess, is a cross gets stabbed into each of Chris McNeil's eyes, and she's blinded by this cross, and it's horribly graphic. No implications there. It's just in each eye, and it's too much, and it doesn't work, and I didn't like it. And also I was bored for a lot of the movie. And at the end, one of the girls, the white girl, innocently dies, and we think Leslie Odom Jr.'s daughter is going to die because they trick them. Because when the white girl's dad is like, I choose my daughter, he says, I choose my daughter. Really, he didn't know he was choosing her to die. So this poor little girl, innocently gets dragged to hell, and the other girl survives, and we're supposed to, I think this is a happy ending, I guess. We're supposed to be like, yay! That girl lit. Well, I feel bad for the other girl too. But yeah, she's dead now. She's dead. That other family, they lost their daughter, but Leslie Odom Jr. didn't lose his daughter, and they're the main characters, so they matter more. You know what I mean? Because we have to kill. We have two girls. They can't both live. We can't kill the black girl because then we're racist. So we have to kill the white girl. You know what I mean? It's just, why did any of that have to happen? So that's The Exorcist Believer. I give that one a 1.5 out of 5. Okay, next I want to mention is When Evil Lurks. I really don't have a lot to say about it, and that's the problem. Like, I've seen it mentioned in like videos after I saw it, where they're like, oh, it's the best horror movie of the year. You're not gonna want to miss this. It's so incredible and scary. And I just kept thinking, like, did we watch the same movie? Like, it wasn't bad, but it was just like, okay, like, cool. They tried to have like shocking death scenes and possession scenes, which they did. But what horror movie nowadays doesn't utilize shock in a very similar way? You know, I was just talking about it with Exorcist Believer, with stabbing in the eyes. It's all just shock scenes. Saw X, that's all shock scenes too. So what does When Evil Lurks do differently about it? They do have a better story structure than at least The Exorcist Believer, but other movies as well. It's not just shock. I did like the effects of it. The story itself, like the lore around possession in this universe, is very interesting. I do like that everybody in this universe, or in this town, in this universe at least of the film, all just like accept that possession is a thing, that like demon possession is a thing, or curses and things like that. They all know that that's real. So it doesn't take a lot for anybody to be convinced of something happening, which is really quite refreshing, honestly, because a lot of movies like this, possession, ghosts, demons, what have you, a lot of the runtime is spent like trying to convince other characters that it's happening, and that just gets tiring. So in this one, it is nice that they're all kind of on board, like, oh yeah, they're possessed, let's get out of here. And there's all these specific rules around it. You can't shoot somebody who is possessed, because then you will be possessed. So there's a lot of death from that, and that's very interesting. The people who are possessed kind of like die and kind of become zombies in a way, like very evil, fucked up zombies who like kill and eat other people and what have you. So it's like possession zombie. Also very interesting. I guess just the reason I didn't love it is I really don't know how to explain it other than it was just kind of like mediocre. in everything else. There's a lot of talking. There's a lot of going over like lore kind of. And I was very confused about it at first. It's like the movie expected me to be on board, and I just felt like I was missing something for a while. Maybe I wasn't paying close enough attention, but it just was drab a little bit. The deaths and the possession itself were great, and then all the story in between it, I was just like, meh, I didn't really care. So I give that one a 2.5 out of 5. This is a very poor explanation for what that movie is about, but I haven't thought about it since I watched it until I was planning to make this video, and that should really tell you everything you need to know. It just didn't stick with me. It was fine. Watch it, I guess. I haven't mentioned which one of these I'd recommend. I would recommend Saw X. I would not recommend Exorcist Believer. I guess When Evil... I'm really quite indifferent about this movie. I really don't feel one way or the other about it, and that's what I have to say. I also saw Killers of the Flower Moon.
The Osage. They have the worst land possible. But they outsmarted everybody. The land had oil on it. Black gold. Money flows freely here now.
I do love that money, sir.
I was shaking it up from the Halloween-y movies. Killers of the Flower Moon is good. It's genuinely great filmmaking. The story itself was also very interesting, very sad. I don't tend to like sad movies, sad stories, and I did feel bad throughout a lot of this film, which docked points from it for me, just for me. But I do acknowledge that it was a very well-made movie, very well acted. I loved the costumes, the visuals, the camera work. Specifically the scene where Leonardo DiCaprio is like walking up to a house outside of his that has exploded, and then later they're like picking through the rubble and one guy is still alive. It's intense. It's scary. It's early America, Native Americans and people and white people coming from all around the country, world, what have you, and trying to take over the wealth that these Native Americans have accumulated for themselves by owning this land and owning the oil that came from this land. And Leonardo DiCaprio marries into one of these families. A lot of white men are marrying into these Native American families for inheritance, and his wife's family is dying one by one because of him, and she doesn't know that. And it's intense. It's a lot. That's very, very interesting. And you grieve for these characters. They're very well rounded, they're very well developed, and I just couldn't help but feel bad for everybody involved except for Leonardo DiCaprio's character, who's a dumbass. And there's definitely a genuine depiction of love between him and Lily Gladstone, because at least in the film he claims to genuinely love her, like her life is not in danger and she is sick and he cares for her. She has diabetes and so he's like helping her treat it. They have multiple children together even while she's sick because he loves her. Courting that they go through before they get married is very cute and lovely, but also he's involved in the murder of most of her family and others to ensure that he will end up with her family money. It's all about greed. It's about a lot of things. Greed is definitely one of them, and I just really liked the depiction of these events, as hard as they were to watch at some point, because you just feel bad because there's a lot of truth in that, what early white people did to Native Americans. Well, and also just today, but at that time, you know what I mean? So in preaching on their traditions, whitewashing them, and the Native American people slowly lose themselves and then also their lives from the greed and hate of white people. So that's what this movie was about, among other things, but that's like a general moral, I guess. It was good. I don't know, obviously, right? It's Martin Scorsese. It was very long. And at the end of the movie, it was like 3.5 hours. And at the end of the movie, when we got out, my boyfriend was asking me how it was. And I said, oh, I liked it. It was just really, really long. And he said, oh, would you have condensed it? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, what would you have taken out? And I thought about it and I was like, I guess I wouldn't take anything out. Like, it was long, but nothing was unnecessary. Everything was very purposeful, what was shown on screen. And it's very long form storytelling. It takes place over the course of several years, which was also very interesting to kind of see like the important parts of the story over the course of however many years it takes place over. So yeah, just beautiful storytelling, great filmmaking, very refreshing film. Probably wouldn't see again just because it is really, really long. And I just don't like long movies. But I would recommend it if you haven't seen it. Definitely, it's worth at least one watch. And I give it a 4 out of 5. Another movie I saw, I have 3 more to go, Five Nights at Freddy's.
Hi, this is Mike. I was just calling to see if that job that you offered was still available.
Yes. The security guard.
I will take anything.
This place was huge in the 80s with the kids. They shut it down years ago. The owner's just not ready to let it go yet.
I was really, really looking forward to this movie. And it's not that I'm particularly a fan of the Five Nights at Freddy's films. I have never played them before. I tried once for like 2 minutes and I lost and I never tried playing it again. And that was like my freshman year of college, which was like, 9 years ago. So a long time, but I did watch a lot of Markiplier in high school when he played Five Nights at Freddy's, and I love those videos. So I don't know, I've always had an appreciation for it, even though I don't know the lore or I haven't seen Matt Pat's videos and he was in the movie and I knew who he was, but I haven't, I'm not into it like that. But I was really excited. I thought it was going to be really good. I thought it was going to be scary. I like Josh Hutcherson. The animatronics looked really cool. I like Matthew Lillard. And I did like all that stuff. I liked Josh Hutcherson. I liked Matthew Lillard's character. He's always amazing. The animatronics / suits were really cool. But the movie itself, it just wasn't scary. There's a lot of focus on the plot that's happening outside of the Five Nights at Freddy's building, outside of Josh Hutcherson being the night guard there, outside of the animatronics. There's this whole other thing happening where he is taking care of his little sister because their parents died, and he has a lot of childhood trauma about his little brother being taken as a child and they never saw him again. And so he like dreams about it every night and he's struggling. He keeps losing jobs because he has like anger issues and issues related to trauma that prevent him from keeping and holding down a job. So he's trying to support his sister. His aunt is trying to take the sister for full custody. It's a whole lot of story outside of the Five Nights at Freddy's plot, which is fine. Not a Five Nights at Freddy's movie. That's an interesting story about like struggle, and the characters portrayed that very well. Josh Hutcherson, you believe it. You believe he's struggling. He looks like a mess, but he is trying his best and we feel for him. But in a Five Nights at Freddy's movie, that just like was not my expectation to have that much like outside plot and so much of a focus on it. I definitely wanted more of the movie to happen inside Five Nights at Freddy's. We don't get any looking, classic game stuff of looking at the animatronics on the screen. And I get that like turning a game into a movie, most of the time you do have to add a lot of plot because games aren't really focused as much on the story usually. Some games are, of course, but even then you gotta add little pieces to make it work as one narrative story in a 1.5, 2 hour time span, right? You have to change some things. You have to add some things, take some things away. And I fully appreciate that. But the huge basis of the game is watching these animatronics on the cameras. And that happens like once, and it's not even Josh Hutcherson, who is the guard, seeing it. Like there's no jump scares either really that make use of the cameras. I can't even really think of any jump scares in general, really, any like effective ones anyway. The animatronics are not scary. They do kill a couple people, and those parts are cool. But a lot of it is they're trying to get close to Josh Hutcherson's little sister to kill her, I guess, and turn her into an animatronic. But the scenes of them like playing with her and they're all making a fort together, like they're not threatening when you portray them that way, even though they have malicious intent. still. And there's a lot of like visions of the children who are trapped in the animatronics, which also makes them a little bit less scary, just to think that like these are just little cute children in there who were tragically killed. But seeing these animatronics as children makes them far less scary, even though they're capable of doing very violent things. The reveal of like Matthew Lillard as the bad guy at the end, he is Springtrap. That was cool. What happens to him where he gets like caught in his own animatronic, he gets spring-trapped, was also cool. The inclusion of his daughter to kind of give exposition worked. You know, you got to get your exposition in there somewhere, and she wasn't a bad character. She was just fine. She really existed to give exposition, but that's okay. And yeah, that's really, I really don't have too much else to say about it, other than it's very non-threatening. There's very little suspense. I wasn't scared at all. It did drag in a few places, and there was a lot of focus on things other than Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria and everything inside of it. And I wish there was more of that. It would have been better to me if the story was more about that. Just in my opinion. I know a lot of people love this movie, some people hated it. I definitely see both sides. I give this one a 2.5 out of 5. So another movie I saw that's technically a November film, but I saw it early, is The Killer.
I find music a useful distraction. A focus tool. Keeps the inner voice from wandering.
This is a new David Fincher film, who of course has directed many a good movie, Seven, Zodiac, The Social Network, lots of really good things. I expected this to be a good movie with the premise, The Killer, being about a contract killer. I thought that there was going to be like more like action and fights, and I kind of wasn't excited for that because I don't really like that kind of thing. I don't like really long extended fight scenes. Short ones here and there when necessary, cool, but all those movies like, you know, Fast and Furious style action movies where it's just so drawn out, the fight scenes and the action and the car chases, it's just so drawn out that it bores me. So I was worried about that happening in this film, but it doesn't. There's nothing gratuitous about it, which I really enjoyed. It's a revenge story. It's kind of like a very low-key John Wick kind of plot, where this contract killer played by Michael Fassbender, big portion, like the first part of the film, the first like 15 minutes, maybe 20, him in Paris, and he's staked out across from a target, and he goes to shoot the target, and we hear his inner monologue the whole time, and he shoots and he misses and ends up killing somebody who was in the way, and then this whole chain of events happens, and that's the rest of the film, where the people who had originally hired his agency to kill that person then wants to kill him for not completing the job. His wife/girlfriend gets like beat pretty bad and is in the hospital, and so he decides to take revenge on people who tried to silence him and got his wife instead. So he finds like the actual person that was sent out to do that. He finds like the guy who sent the hit, and like this lady who was a part of it, who had like ordered the original hit that he was supposed to do. And so he finds all these people, he tracks them down. There's a lot of travel in this movie, and so we see him going to all these airports, which again is not unnecessary. Like everything is purposeful, similar to Killers of the Flower Moon. Both David Fincher and Martin Scorsese are both very good at like not wasting time on screen. Like they use a lot of time, but everything that they put in front of you is for a reason. And that's what good filmmaking is. They're not the only two that do it. It's just a good filmmaker thing to do. Like don't put anything unnecessary on your screen. Don't waste your audience's time. And that's something I really liked about The Killer. It doesn't waste our time, but it shows what we need to show. And he has all these different identities shown through when he travels, different IDs, different passports. We don't know who he really is. And that's very interesting. He's a mystery, which is really cool to have your main character. We don't know you. We really don't know anything about you other than he is a contract killer. and he has this wife in Argentina who he loves deeply. And he tracks all these people down, kills all of them except the top guy he finds who had like ordered the hit, and doesn't kill him. And I kind of am like, don't really understand why, because he killed people who he really didn't need to kill previously. Like the driver who drove the people to his house to beat up his wife, who had no idea what was happening. Like, I don't understand why he had to die, but that's beside the point. The complaints I have about it aren't really against it as a movie. It's just things where I'm like, why did he have to die? Because I'm sensitive. But yeah, he's successful, and it's a happy ending technically after all of this death. Each interaction he has with each of these characters he's planning to confront and kill are very different and very interesting. He's a really, really tough guy, and this is pretty much the only like long fight scene we have in the film, is he goes to Florida to fight like the tough guy that beat up his wife, and struggles to kill him, but eventually does it. And then in another scene, he's in this very fancy restaurant with Tilda Swinton, who is another lady who was a part of the hit order, who was there when all that stuff went down with Michael Fassbender's wife. And they sit and have a conversation, and she's like mostly talking, and she's giving these analogies, and she is like, we think she's kind of accepting her fate, but also like fighting back in her own way. And it's just complete contrast between scenes. Every scene is its own special pace, special environment, very, very different portrayals of how each of these killings is going down. And the characters, while we don't see any of them for very long, they are well developed in a way. We're given everything we need to know about them through not just like their dialogue and self-expression, but visuals around them. The guy who lives in Florida, we know everything about him because he lives in this house on the seaside in this random town in Florida. He has a big old pit bull. He has tons of muscle. He hangs out with douchey friends and drives a big Jeep. We know everything we need to know about this guy from those things. Tilda Swinton, like I said, we see her in this big fancy restaurant. The waiter and bartender seem to know her very well. She probably comes to this fancy restaurant a lot. She's very well put together and polite. We know everything we need to know about her just from really her environment where she's at and the way she speaks to those around her. We don't need to know these people's backstory. We don't even need to know their names. We know everything we need to know about them. Same with the last guy, tech mogul guy. We know he goes to this fancy gym, and it takes a while, like the process that Michael Fassbender's character goes through to find these people and get into their homes or wherever they're in the restaurant. He has to, the tech guy, he gets at the end, like the final boss, if you will, he has to like break into his gym. He gets like a free trial membership for his gym to find his locker, to steal his key. He has to order a key fob copier on Amazon, which is really interesting. They use a lot of like modern things. He's like ordering stuff on Amazon, next day delivery, copies his key fob to get into his apartment, to then go up and confront him in his apartment. And it's like a multi-day process to get this guy. Like, his dedication is incredible. And it's just, I could go on about that movie for a while. I didn't want to make a whole video about it. A video of me just gushing about how much I liked a movie, I feel like isn't that interesting. And if you haven't seen it, definitely see it. If you have seen it, you know everything that I'm going to say. So that's it. Very interesting sequence of events in that film. Very down to earth for what it was, and I really enjoyed it, despite the fact that it isn't really my kind of movie. Like, I don't think it's something I would watch again, and I don't usually pursue films like that, but for what it was, I did think it was very good. For all those reasons, I give it a 3.5 out of 5. Okay, last one that I saw, I did see this first week of November, but I'm not going to make a separate video about it, so I thought I would just include it here. The Holdovers.
Every year at Barton Academy, students, faculty, and staff depart the campus for a 2-week winter break. But there are always an unfortunate few who have nowhere to go for the holidays. They're known as the Holdovers.
Mr. Hunnam.
Hello, Mary.
I heard you got stuck with babysitting duty this year. How'd you manage that?
The Holdovers is a very cozy film, despite being quite sad in subject matter. That's a theme in a lot of these movies. There's a lot of just like sad, traumatic themes. Family trauma specifically is a running theme throughout a lot of these movies. But it stars Paul Giamatti, who is so good in this movie. His acting in this film is phenomenal. His character, I have to believe that that's just kind of how Paul Giamatti must be in real life, maybe, because how could you embody that character so well? It's just a credit to his acting. Like, he really became that character. And a lot of the times I watch movies starring household name type people, which Paul Giamatti is for me. I don't know about y'all, but I love Paul Giamatti. In this household, we respect Paul Giamatti. And I wasn't thinking about how that was him, right? Like, he was his character. And a lot of the time I just think about how that actor is that character. Like, the whole time in Killers of the Flower Moon, as good as Leonardo DiCaprio is, he's Leonardo DiCaprio. You know what I mean? And this one, Paul Giamatti was his character. He was this, like, 70s ancient civilizations professor at this all-boys boarding academy. Like, he was that guy. And he was very, very interesting. He had, like, a wonky eye, and he's kind of like a social outcast because of, like, how he looks and how he talks. He's just always saying, like, oh, the Romans used to use forks for this, like, that kind of guy. Well, in the ancient civilization of something I've never heard of, they used to use cow's pee to wash their face. I don't know. Like, that's what he was doing the whole movie. And it was very interesting, very funny. It's funny without jokes, this film. It's just funny in the way people interact with each other. The whole movie is not funny, but there are a lot of, like, genuinely very funny bits, also genuinely very heartwarming bits. It's about Paul Giamatti as a professor, like I said. Takes place in the 70s, looks like it's shot in the 70s, which is really interesting. They, like, shot it on film, or at least a way that made it look like it was shot on film, to look like and sound like even a film that was made in the 70s, colorized like a film in the 70s, like it wasn't HD, which added to, like, the coziness of, like, the tone of the movie. But he is in charge of, like, watching the boys who have to stay over at the school for winter break. And it starts out with, like, 5 boys, and then 4 of them get to leave on this other boy's, like, private helicopter because they're all, like, rich kids. And then 1 boy has to stay because his mom chose to spend the holiday with his stepdad instead and leave him at the school. And let me say about that, I would be so pissed. After the movie, I was so pissed off. I was like, I would never forgive that woman. And then she gets mad about what he did when he stayed over at the school with Paul Giamatti, because it's just the main kid and Paul Giamatti for most of the movie. And they go on this, like, wacky little adventure. Not wacky, it's pretty low-key, but, they have an arc together. They have an emotional arc together. They start out hating each other, and then they bond over many things over the course of these 2 weeks. His mom comes back and, like, gets mad at some of the things that they did. Like, they went to visit Boston. It takes place in Massachusetts, and it's outside. It's not in Boston, so they, like, travel to it, and she's, like, mad about it. That, oh, why did you take my son off campus to do this, and this, blah, blah, blah. Lady, you left him here. You left him here for Christmas and New Year's. Like, he gets to do whatever he wants. Like, if you didn't want him going to Boston with his professor, you should have taken him home for Christmas. Like, that's all I gotta say about that. But otherwise, it was a really interesting character study, I guess is what I want to say. It's somewhat uneventful. Things happen, right? The boys, they get into a fight, and then a bunch of the boys leave, and Paul Giamatti and our main boy have, like, conflict. His name is Angus, I should say. I should stop calling him the boy. But Angus and Paul Giamatti have this, like, tension between them, and he's kind of a rebel. He's been kicked out of a bunch of schools before, but also he's really, really smart and gets really good grades. We learn that his dad is in a sanitarium. They don't really say what happened, but it's implied he has, like, schizophrenia or something that showed up later in his life after he was normal for many years. And when Angus was young, like a few years prior to the events of this film, he just started not making sense and losing his mind, essentially. Then his mother divorces him and gets remarried, and it's been really hard on Angus, and that's kind of how he became so rebellious, and we learn a lot about him. We learn about Paul Giamatti's loneliness and he has been stuck at this. He went to this school. He then left to go to Harvard, got kicked out of Harvard, and came back to teach at that school. And he's been there for a very long time, and his life has really gone nowhere. He's not really done a whole lot with it other than what he's doing now, teaching at this school. So we learn a lot about him and how he got there, and his interests and passions and past that led him to where he is now. And they go on a little trip to Boston. Like I said, they go to like a Christmas party and they do all these things together, and they bond and fight and bond and fight. So it's just a character study mostly between the two, but there's also a really interesting character, the cook. Her name is Mary, who works at the school. She is also staying over for the holidays. She had recently lost her son that same year. She worked at this school to give him a good education. She couldn't afford to send him to the college he wanted to go to, so he went to military school. He joined the army briefly, and he died overseas. So now she's there because she really has no place to go. She feels bad celebrating the holidays without her son there. And she goes through a lot in this film too. She's actually really funny. She has a lot of insight. She gets along really well with Paul Giamatti's character. Like, their chemistry between the two, it is really interesting, and they work well together on screen. There's times where reality is really hitting her and she breaks down, and she's being protective over Angus, and it's kind of like this fun little dynamic between the three of them. And there's other characters along the way, but it's mostly the three of them and a lot of the two of them, Paul and Angus. And so it really cares about the characters, this film. It's about the characters, not what's happening to them, how they react to what's happening to them, which is the kind of story that I really like. It's not always about the plot. It's not about what's happening. It's about how the characters are dealing with what's happening and what we learn about them through these events. And we learned a lot, and we really connect to these characters. I did anyway. It's not hard to, and get lost in these characters' lives. So it was really well made. It's sad. A lot of what happens is sad and very like drab just because there's a lot of like misery and trauma between these three characters. It's kind of like a movie I would put on in the background during the holidays. I tune in during my favorite scenes. It's a really good film, but it does like drag, but it's meant to. Like, I'm not putting that against it. The Holdovers, good film, recommend it. I give it a 4 out of 5. And that is the last film in my October catch-up. Let me know if you guys have seen any of those. If the ones that I recommended, watch them if you haven't. If you have, definitely tell me if you agree. I'll definitely be back with more videos again soon. My hiatus, I am ending it. And I'm really excited to get into more series videos. I really enjoy making those. They just take a really long time to make. Most of the time, whenever there's a really big break in between my content, it's because I'm working on a long form series video. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!
Thanks for watching, honeybees. Make sure to like and subscribe. Bye!